1982, Reagan's America. A typical white middle-class all-American family sleeps soundly in their beds as the TV, which has been left on, ends its daily broadcast. But little did this family know that their perfect suburban existence is about to be threatened by something else inside their house. Something angry, vengeful, something that doesn't want to be forgotten. With the huge success of haunted house movies like Amityville and The Changeling, some of the other big American genre directors like Spielberg, Tobe Hooper and John Carpenter were able to make their own spins on the genre. Ones that took on the old traditions of campfire ghost stories of writers like Edgar Allan Poe, but added in popular horror tropes of the time such as grisly gore, practical effects, and commentary on modern American society. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and we review John Carpenter's The Fog and Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is part 7, in which, as the intro suggested, we're going to be covering two brilliant early 80s ghost movies, The Fog and Poltergeist. Can't wait to get into these discussions. Now, before we get started, here are a few contact details. You can email us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter, that's @evolutionpod, or on Facebook, that's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And if you want to subscribe to us on Letterboxd, then please do. That's where you can keep up to date with what movies we're going to be covering on the podcast over the next couple of months, just in case you want to create your own little watch list and check out the movies in advance. So, I'm going to be joined by two different guests this week, each one to discuss a different movie with me. So later on in the podcast, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant, award-winning filmmaker, Prano Bailey Bond. She's going to be joining me to discuss all things Poltergeist. But first, to discuss The Fog with me is somebody who has already been on the podcast before. He was here at the end of the Slasher series to test my knowledge and make me look and feel incredibly bad. He works in the movie visual effects business by day, and he runs his own movie quiz by night. I'm very excited to have back with me the king of trivia, the brilliant Bryan Ryan. Bryan, hello again.
Hi.
How are you since we last spoke?
I'm good. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel like that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago. Yeah. We've had Christmas, New Year, that's about it. You've had your first quiz already. You've had your first big quiz.
First at the new one,
in January in the new venue, and that sold out sold out, really fast, didn't it?
It was pretty packed. Yeah, the amount of people in the place convinced the pub to add another television to their wall. So
amazing.
Everyone's not stretching to see. So now we're on 2 screens at the Albany.
That's brilliant. I bet the pub loved that. I bet they love you guys.
He's like, look, if I can find another space for you, let's do 2. We've already sold out for February 26th.
Wow.
So we're hoping to do another evening where we actually have a ghost in film round.
Do you?
Yeah, not necessarily horror.
Yeah.
Maybe some horror ghosts.
Anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm already looking forward to, when we get to the end of this ghost series of episodes, you coming back and giving me a ghost quiz.
I've already started writing stuff down.
Amazing. Amazing.
I have a notepad full, a page on a notepad full.
Very exciting. So. I mean, the thing about ghost movies is, we've talked about this already, like you say, it doesn't always necessarily mean horror. It's really broad, isn't it? When it comes to, it's a little bit less confined than the slasher, for example, or zombie movies or something like that. It follows less rules, I suppose. But what's your kind of opinion in general on this kind of subgenre of movies, of ghost movies? Are you a fan?
In terms of horror?
Yeah.
It's definitely my wife's favorite. I go back and forth. Here's the thing. If Friday the 13th didn't exist, it would be ghost films for me. Mm-hmm. But the Friday the 13th series really puts slashers on top for me. And there's so many just fun slashers. You don't see a lot of really... outright fun ghost movies, that are just kind of taking the piss after a while. I think you get some really ace performances from performers and actors in these films. They just feel a little more like films than most. Whereas most horror films kind of feel like movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It almost feel a little bit less like what we'd call genre movies, don't they, in a way?
Yeah, and they can kind of go that way.
Yeah.
But there's so much style to a ghost film, and something like The Innkeepers or The Others, things like that. I mean, there's just so much else going on.
There is.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like we've talked about already in this series. We talked about things like the haunting and the innocence, and we had a whole discussion about that almost didn't include discussion of any ghost. It's like there's so much meaty stuff to talk about, kind of psychological elements, and weird kind of sexual subtext,
for sure,
all kind of weird stuff going on before you even get to the fact that it's a haunted house movie. So they're those types of movies. They're sort of very dense, and where we've gotten up to so far. So we've kind of covered all of those early '60s ones into the sort of TV ghost stories by M.R. James and the BBC ones.
I got the box set for Christmas. So, I've been plowing my way through that.
So good, and then we did Amityville Horror and The Changeling, which
together,
is awesome, back to back.
Nice.
And then last week The Shining. So and now we're kind of up. So we're up to the sort of early '80s, and it did feel a little bit like, there hasn't been a kind of boom, with ghost movies like there are with slashers, for example. But there is kind of what feels like a little mini boom here, where you've got a series of big hitters. You had Amityville in '79, The Changeling, The Shining, The Fog. Then you had Poltergeist, The Entity.
The Entity. Wow.
Yeah, amazing movies, all within this sort of. Again, it's a big time for horror, isn't it? Sort of late '70s, early '80s.
Around that time, it was like ghosts. The late '70s, early '80s was kind of reserved for ghosts and Satanism.
And Satanism.
And like
Totally. Yeah. So The Fog then. First of all, let's get, before we get into The Fog, John Carpenter. So this is his first movie since Halloween. His first sort of feature movie after making Halloween. What are your thoughts on John Carpenter in general? Are you a fan?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, you can't not be, really.
I mean, I like even the stuff that people consider bad Carpenter. I mean, I find things to love in vampires and Ghosts from Mars and things like that. But The Ward, not so much.
Yeah.
But I think, as with anybody who's listening to this podcast right now, you can't not be a Carpenter fan, And I mean, I see a lot of things on Twitter like, like the polls they put up, like Carpenter or Wes Craven.
Yes,
it's so. I love them both.
Yes.
It's apples to oranges, but Carpenter, I really do believe he just knows how to craft something amazing, and it's so great to see how appreciated he is today.
Yeah.
But he just wasn't that appreciated then.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's interesting because, Craven felt like he kind of had these kind of constant sort of sporadic big hitters across sort of 3 or 4 decades, with kind of forgotten ones in between. Whereas Carpenter had this amazing run at this point in his career, didn't he? Of like consecutive. I'm just having a look now because Assault on Precinct 13 to Halloween to The Fog to Escape from New York to The Thing, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness to They Live. I mean, that run of films.
In the Mouth of Madness. I love In the Mouth of Madness. But that's 94.
Yeah. To me, then we get to the early 90s and we get Memoirs of an Invisible Man in the Mouth of Madness,
so that kind of
Village of the
Damned.
Damned. That's what I mean. But you've got that incredible streak through the sort of 70s and 80s.
And all of those movies you mentioned up to Memoirs of an Invisible Man are perfect.
Yeah. They're like 10s.
Yeah. No. Like, I'm trying to think which one I like the least, and it's really hard.
I mean, I love Christine, but in some ways, Christine felt like the one that was less Carpentry in that he took it on as a director for hire, and it was a Stephen King story that he just kind of came and did the job, and it's still great.
Yeah.
But there's something about The Fog, especially like watching it again last night. I was thinking, this is just so inherently Carpenter. It's like it's got his fingerprints all over it. The writing, the directing, everything.
Absolutely. And I think there are other aspects to it that really, there's so much more that stands out with this film that kind of put it on a different level. And I'm not saying a better level, but put it on a different level than most of those films that you mentioned in that span of time. I mean, the cast and
the cast. Yeah.
I mean, but one thing that really stood out for me was the way it's lit. And the colors, and it's actually quite beautiful the way he mixes. You know, he has these bright greens in the car, and on the boat you have have the green in the background, and this bright red, and then there's just the shot of the guy with just the light on his face, and the ghost is coming in through the door there. I mean, it's lit so well, and those are things I didn't appreciate as a kid.
No,
I just wanted people to start dying, and I wanted to see boobs. Not a lot of boobs in the but but you know why you watch horror films when you're younger. But now from I guess an adult eye, you see so much more skill in there than 100%. You ever knew was there, and I've seen this movie. There's always, and matter of fact, I can't even remember what it was, but there was something that happened in the movie, and I was like, I've definitely seen this movie at least 50 times.
Have you?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my Halloween movies.
Is it? Well, this is good, because I've seen it twice. Like, last night was the second time I'd ever watched it. The first time I watched it, I was a kid. So it was almost like watching it again brand new for me last night.
That's the thing. And great. I picked up something I'd never seen before, and I can't remember what it was. Same with The Thing. I watched The Thing maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I noticed that one of the characters had an earring, and I'm like, how did I not see that?
See, that for me is my favorite. I mean, it's so many people's favorites, isn't it? That's my favorite Carpenter movie.
Me too.
I mean,
it's perfect. But I after rewatching The Fog, I feel like it's kind of forgotten. I think Christine and The Fog are probably his least favored films. Outside of when you get into the 90s, the more forgotten, because people tend to lean obviously towards Halloween or toward Escape from New York.
Yeah, the Kurt Russell ones.
Yeah. But I mean, The Fog is solid.
I think it is. Yeah, it's kind of like it's the one that came between The Thing and Halloween, isn't it? As the kind of forgotten of his horror movies.
I think he could have stopped making movies after The Fog, and it would still be. He would still be revered as he is today for that. Film.
What is it about his films, do you think, that... What is it about his directing that gets it so right with these kinds of movies?
Well, he just... I think he knows how to pace suspense,
Yeah.
He knows how to... He knows how to show just enough to the audience and nothing to the victim or whatever. And I think that's what Halloween's all about. Oh my God, look behind you, behind you. There's a lot of that in The Fog too, and I think they're almost like sister films in that sense.
They are actually,
I can't say offhand if I know anyone up to that point who really kind of knew how to pace a horror film the way that he does.
I think you're right. I think it is that since Hitchcock, maybe the best person in terms of that kind of suspense, that pacing, and everything about his movies is just so wonderfully stripped back. Like, they're so usually kind of 80 or 90 minute running time. Get straight to it, in and out. Even the music encapsulates that. His music is usually like 2 or 3 notes playing one kind of chilling piece of repetitive music that fits perfectly.
Oh, absolutely.
And that music kind of sums up everything about his direction to me. It's like basic, stripped back, but so much about atmosphere and achieves everything with so little. That's what he manages to do.
Absolutely.
Where's the fog now?
Well, it should be right outside my door now.
Oh, there's something different about this fog. Dan, stay away from the door! Someone listen to me!
Get inside and lock your doors. Close your windows. There's something in the fog. From the creator of Halloween, the ultimate experience in terror and suspense. John Carpenter's The Fog, starring Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, John Houseman, Janet Leigh as Kathy Williams, and Hal Holbrook as Father Malone. The Fog. What you can't see won't hurt you. It will kill you.
the story, very simply, it's set in a small fishing town of Antonio Bay, and the town is about to celebrate its centennial, its 100-year anniversary. This strange, unearthly fog begins to roll into the town at night with a ship full of these demonic spirits, these angry, vengeful, maybe want to call them pirates, but they're basically just kind of angry, evil sailors who then begin to sort of wreak havoc in the town and kill people off, and that's pretty much it. When it first starts, because, there are elements of this that, of course, it is a ghost story, but actually there are elements of this where I just think it's almost a slasher.
For sure.
You
could substitute the ghosts with escape mental patients.
Yeah. It's almost Halloween, but with multiple kind of supernatural baddies all over the place. Exactly. Yeah. But it does start in that real kind of vintage ghost story way of people sat around a campfire.
That's perfect. That to me is the greatest opening of any horror film.
Yeah.
11:55, almost midnight. Enough time for one more story. One more story before 12. Just to keep us warm.
I mean, John Houseman is, amazing. That voice is just wonderful. The story he tells is great. And you don't, everybody's, I assume everyone's sat around, told ghost stories, things like that, and you can just see it in the kid's face. They're scared, they're excited, they're having fun. And that's exactly what I think the film's intended to do.
I think so. Yeah. So do you remember the first time you ever watched The Fog? How old you were or what?
Yes, I was probably 9, 8.
What? So young.
Yeah. Because I remember my aunt had cable. I lived out in the country in Texas, and cable hadn't come to us yet. And my aunt had cable, and she recorded The Fog, The Thing, and Mr. Mom on one tape. Yeah. And my cousin Jennifer gave it to me to borrow, and I never gave it back. I wish I still had it, actually.
Yeah.
But and that's when I first watched both The Fog and The Thing.
Oh my God, what a double
and
bill.
Mr. Mom.
Amazing. What did you think of The Fog upon first watch?
For me, it was I loved it.
Yes.
I want to say I liked it because if I'm not mistaken, I think The Thing was first.
Yeah.
And I think that was still kind of in my brain.
Well, that's like, oh my God, awesome monsters and dogs turning themselves inside out.
And that's a kid like me anyway. I loved it, and then to kind of go to something a little less grand.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way, but a little less grand in scale. I don't remember being crazy about it.
Yeah.
But there were aspects of it that I loved.
It's an interesting one because it does feel like a sort of movie that I think, apart from some of the nasty kind of eye gouging and stuff, it almost could be like a kind of family-friendly horror movie in a way. This kind of like kids sat around the campfire ghost story of these.
I think it could have.
Town.
Didn't they reshoot some stuff to add the inserts of like the guys being stabbed and their eyes getting gouged out?
Interestingly, he also added in the campfire introduction afterwards as well.
Really?
According to the trivia I read on IMDb, so who knows if that's true, but he got the film to the edit. It had a lot of all that stuff missing. About a third of the film wasn't there at that point, but he thought it was complete, but he was like, this doesn't work at all. And then he went and he shot the opening. He added some more gore and some other stuff that was probably, I imagine, in 1980 very popular.
That slasher element.
Yes,
I suppose.
Exactly, the slasher element. And went back and then completely improved it by the sounds of it. But
I would like to see it. I would like to actually see a cut of it without that. Yeah, I mean, not that it affects it in any way for me, but just to kind of see what his original
thoughts were.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder whether he did intend it to be a little bit more like, I guess restrained is what, by the sounds of it, if he added all the gore and violence in afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, you could, like you said, it could be a group, the kids around the campfire, it could have been a lot more fun. It could have been made into, the Monster Squad, essentially.
Exactly.
I'm all through, Father. Oh, thank you, Bennett. I won't need you until 4 tomorrow, Bennett.
Yes, sir.
Would you like something to keep you warm on the way home?
No, thank you. Father, can I get paid?
Why don't you come in at 6 instead of 4 tomorrow?
Let's talk a little bit about the characters, because I think the cast is pretty impressive in this, isn't it? It's amazing, isn't it? It's kind of like a horror fan's wet dream to watch this movie.
But even just like, you have like one of the greatest character actors ever, with Hal Holbrook.
Right. Yes.
And he's just it's fun to see him playing along.
Yeah.
And having fun with it. You know? Janet Leigh, of course.
Janet Leigh. I mean, obviously Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, it is. And then you've got a couple of people from, Nancy Loomis pops up as well from Halloween. And
well, I mean, for me, this is just me. It's not just me, I think, but I am all about Tom Atkins, and Tom Atkins in this film is gangster. Like, he's just so, like, to use a term between this and Halloween 3, to go back to my 15-year-old self.
Yes,
he is the Mac. Like, he picks up some random hitchhiker who just happens to be Jamie Lee Curtis. And they go and solve mysteries of this mystery of what's happening in Antonio Bay. And
they go and have sex first, don't they? As well,
they don't even know each other's names. And like, while the teenage me is like, man, that's awesome. It seems a little. I wouldn't recommend it these days.
No, exactly.
Like look, Tom Atkins. He must be a funny guy, because he's not the best looking guy in the world.
No.
But in this and Halloween 3, he's doing all right.
Listen, I never hitchhiked before. I just really want to be careful. Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Are you weird?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am weird.
You are weird.
Yes.
You're weird. Thank God you're weird. The last ride I had was so normal, it was disgusting. He picked me up in Santa Barbara. By the time we got to Carmel, he wanted to marry me.
Oh, yeah. I thought you never hitchhiked before.
Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis is not the virginal Laurie Strode anymore, is she, by this point?
I wonder if that was, the intention was to say, well, she's done this, now let's give her... Was this before Trading Places?
It was. It was.
Okay.
This would have been the same year as things like Prom Night and Terror Train that she did as well. I don't know kind of in terms of what came first out of those things.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure they were 80 or maybe 81, but they were all around the same sort of time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was the kind of scream queen by this point,
is
of
the
course.
scream queen. Like,
she is.
There's, you see it a lot. You see it a lot on Twitter. People saying, "Oh, this Scream Queen, so and so." You see people referring to themselves as Scream Queens. And that's great, dude. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
she's a Scream Queen. She is the Scream Queen, and I think anybody who works in the genre watches a horror movie.
Yes,
there's a reason she's coming back for this Danny McBride Halloween. It's because she is part of its life.
Now, there's a celebration planned for tonight, so if you're so excited about it you can't sleep, well, stay up with me, and I'll figure out some way to keep you occupied. Or not.
I don't even know who you would consider the lead in this movie. I think it's an ensemble.
It's like a complete ensemble.
It's like if Robert Altman did a horror film.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And honestly, I could see a Robert Altman horror film having this same cast. Like, it's that legit, you know?
Yeah.
I guess if there was, it would be Adrienne Barbeau. But she's more or less like the chorus.
Who is wonderful as well. Absolutely. Bit in love with her. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
Was he married to her at this time as well?
Was he? I didn't know that.
I think they were married.
Because, of course, John Carpenter, doesn't he make a little cameo in this at some point?
Oh, my God, yes. Yes, he does. It's funny because after we watched it, he comes in and he's cleaning up the church.
Yes.
He's like, well, Father, can I get paid now? And Hal Holbrook's just like drinking a snifter of brandy, and he's like, come in late tomorrow. And John Carpenter's kind of like, I don't know his character's name. He's just kind of like, well, okay. Shit. And he walks out. And then the movie ends, and my wife looks over at me. She goes, you know the one thing I really wonder about this film? She says, did John Carpenter ever get paid?
Yes, exactly. So what happened to him the next day as well? Did he come in? Yeah. We'll never know.
I would probably call in sick. Yeah, well, there's your sequel idea right there.
Exactly. So this movie, compared to what we've been talking about previously, like Amityville, The Changeling, would you call this movie a ghost movie? Does it fit that kind of mold, do you think?
It does. I mean, I think the ghost films are so broad. I mean, I think you talk about something like The Changeling or Poltergeist. Yes. I mean, they're both in the same. You're going to find them next to each other at Blockbuster.
Yeah.
But
it's almost like within Ghost Story, then you've got the haunted house, and that's the haunted house, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I absolutely think this fits.
Yes.
As a ghost story. I was kind of surprised. Not surprised, but when you mentioned that you were doing The Fog, I was like, oh man, that's great. I wouldn't have even thought of that because when I think ghost movies, I immediately you think hone in on the others, and Innkeepers and The Changeling and stuff like that. Even Amityville, it never really. I mean.
Well, it's not one of the best ones, is it, Amityville? That's the thing. It's a little.
It scares the shit out of me.
Does it? Yeah. To me, I find it a bit weak, but it is important. It's one of the original haunted house movies in a way. The big mainstream ones.
It has some moments. I think it really suffers under the performances.
Yes.
And. I mean the special effects aren't great, but the moment with the flies on the window
that's a great moment.
Get out is just
that's a great moment.
That to me is one of the most terrifying moments.
Yeah,
I remember the first time I heard that as a kid, it scared the ever loving shit out of me.
Yeah, it scared the shit out of me editing it the other day. I had my headphones up loud and I put that clip in and absolutely shit myself.
Yeah.
But that movie it's got a lot to answer for as well in terms of look at everything now, The Conjuring. Those movies are all basically Amityville, really. In some ways,
I think. I mean, we kind of went into this. I think James Wan is kind of like diet Carpenter.
Yeah.
The Conjuring films. I mean, at this point, I feel like we've seen it 100 times, and I don't think it's a movie for me necessarily. I think the target market is young
teenagers,
20, stuff like that. But but you're right. I think there's a formula, and I think that most of James Wan's ghost stuff kind of follows that formula.
Yeah. And this is how different The Fog is to all of these other films. Like you say, it's not one you'd automatically think of. It's kind of like this weird sort of ghost slasher monster movie. I almost think of it as well as like a little, the fact that it's like this kind of town attacked by this monster. It's almost like a kind of 50s, like The Blob or The Birds even, or those types of sort of monster movies of the 50s and 60s as well, a little bit.
And they never really. What's great is they never really discuss. Let's leave.
No. Yeah.
Let's just get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Like, it's a small town. I mean, how far do you have to go to get away from the fog?
Yeah.
Like, they never really discuss that, and that didn't occur to me until you mentioned The Birds or you mentioned The Blob. These are things you can just kind of get away from, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, The Birds, I guess, not so much, but
yeah.
And I like that. It's a tight movie. It
is,
and they don't waste any time. They just get right into it, and they accept that this is where this is happening, and they get into it.
And actually, it is, even though it's a short film, it does still take its time. Apart from that, it's got a great opening. It's the classic kind of Carpenter structure, I suppose, but it has like this wonderful, scary, creepy opening, and then it just really just takes its time to kind of introduce all these different characters and these different pockets of this town.
Yeah, and you're like, oh well, what do they have to do with one another?
Yeah.
And they have nothing to do with each other.
Nothing.
I don't even think these people have ever bumped into each other. Maybe I almost said Tippi Hedren shit.
Yeah, well,
maybe Janet Leigh and Hal Holbrook. Maybe.
Yeah.
But it takes a group full of strangers and puts them in a very bad situation.
Yeah, it's one of those classic. It appears simple, but it has a lot of elements working all at the same time.
Yeah.
So Carpenter is obviously so well known for creating such brilliant monsters, like The Thing, Michael Myers. How do you think these monsters compare? These, whatever we want to call them, pirates, ghosts, whatever they are.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really see a lot of people dressing up as Blake for Halloween.
No.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think they're kind of forgotten, and because the monsters the other monsters he's created, even Christine, are so memorable, especially obviously Michael Myers and The Thing. But I think they deserve a little credit.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I watched the Blu-ray this time, and we actually had the lights off as we were watching it, and I've never seen the features of Blake before.
Yeah.
But the Blu-ray was so good that you could actually see some of his features, which kind of made me wish I hadn't.
Yes, yes. You know? And we talked about this before on the podcast, actually, that, when you watch Blu-rays of these kind of old vintage movies, you're seeing things that were never supposed to be seen in a way. You're seeing through the cracks in a way that you shouldn't as well, which is kind of unfair on the director. He never knew that 30, 40 years later we would see everything,
Of course. Yeah.
But they are good, and I suppose the thing is, it is the fog as well that's just as much the monster as the things inside.
Yeah.
And the fog is creepy.
That is
the creeping, slow-moving dread of that thing, surging its way through the town.
And I just love the character on the tower, kind of like the sniper, who is witness to all of this stuff happening, and more or less can't really do anything about it, except for say, get out of the way.
Yes.
It's pretty fantastic.
Yes, when the woman in the lighthouse is like trying to get hold of her son because she can see it happening.
Somebody go get him. And
it's a great moment.
Andy, get out of the house! Mrs. Covenant, get him out of the house, please, run!
I think maybe we better close all the windows, Andy. Are your bedroom windows closed?
I'll go see.
And I love the way, like you've already mentioned it briefly, but like the look of this film, the lighting, even the way that the fog itself is lit, is incredible. Isn't it?
It's one of those things, I work in visual effects.
Yes.
And there's certain times that when we were watching it, I would say, how did they do that? How did they do that back then? How did they get this enormous, how did they do it? Like this enormous just patch of fog coming over the ocean to glow like this bright green, blue. It's amazing. And, there's a shot of, I don't even know who he is in the movie. He's the one that talks with Adrian Barbeau, Stevie.
Yeah.
I guess he's at another point on the island, and he's driving to work or whatever. And as his car kind of passes, the camera, this giant fog bank just kind of rolls in, and it's just this bright blue. The colors are amazing.
Amazing.
And I would say it's probably his most vibrant film.
It is.
While at the same time almost being his darkest film.
Yes. Yes, it's true. It's that just like really beautiful contrast of sort of pitch black dark with these kind of strips of bright light here and there.
Yeah.
That I love. Actually, the one thing it did remind me of a bit is you get that look a little bit in Christine, where when the girl is killed and strangled in the car and the bright lights suddenly come on really vibrantly. It's got that same kind of look.
Yeah, with Arnie driving at the end. Yeah, I love there's something very nostalgic for me about seeing somebody sitting in a car and their face is just lit this bright green from whatever dials or whatever in the dashboard. And obviously it doesn't get like that,
yes, exactly.
But Carpenter, I mean, it happens in his films, and in this one especially. I think it's the same scene when the guy's driving to work or whatever. He's just lit this amazing green, and it's pitch black. Like he's almost like in a just a circle of light in this dark expanse. It's pretty great.
It's awesome, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. He's not going for realism or naturalism with his lighting. But it just looks. It's
you wonder like what I mean. But with Carpenter, with this one specifically, I think he really can pace and block a scene unlike any other horror director.
Yeah, definitely. It's all those little elements we talked about. It's the pacing, it's the suspense. Also, he knows when to. There are some ghost movies that will only rely on kind of build up, on leaving everything to the imagination. But he just is just as much a fan of showing you the monster as he is the build up beforehand. Look at The Thing. I mean, we talked about recently. The Thing for me is one of the. I could count on one hand the amount of examples of, actually seeing the monster the payoff is as good as your expectations would be. Where there are so many things where, you're scared until you see what the monster looks like, and then you're a bit disappointed. With The Thing, it is like, what you were seeing on screen, you could never have dreamt up anything as horrific.
Absolutely. Your imagination. Normally your imagination is always worse than scarier than what you actually see, but your mind just couldn't.
It's another level of amazing imaginative sort of creativity, and he's he gives you all the elements. I think John Carpenter, he knows when to hold back, but he also knows when to just sort of throw everything at you.
I wish he'd make another movie.
I
really do.
One more pure, brilliant 90-minute genre movie by Carpenter. Stripped back. It would be wonderful. any sort of other general highlights of The Fog? Any other key moments for you? Key scares? Anything?
I mean, like I said earlier, the nanny or the babysitter being dragged into the fog, I thought is pretty awesome. I think the scene at the beginning or towards the beginning, the credits are really long on this movie.
Really long. It's basically like a whole opening sequence, isn't it, with the credits?
Like when the guy at the gas station or the market or whatever, and he opens the orange juice and takes a sip, and the credits are still rolling. Yeah. I remember actively saying, like, the credits are still going on this. I really like the sequence in the shop. With him and
that kind of low, long camera angle he does down the aisle, and again, just everything. It just looks so perfect.
That's the thing. It's so simple.
So simple.
Not saying that in execution it was simple to make the film. No. I don't know, but it's so. Everything, it just shows what good storytelling. You don't need the best effects. You don't need, like, in 15 years, if I show that to my daughter, probably earlier than that, but if she watches it with me, she'll probably, I hope she doesn't say, oh God, the cheesy effects or whatever, you know. I hope that's not what she's focused on. But I honestly don't think so. I honestly think what carries this film is it's a great story. It's a creepy story.
Yeah.
It's a campfire tale.
It is.
Brought to life. And you don't really... I'm trying to think of another movie that's like that.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. No, exactly. And it's interesting. I wonder, do you know, I don't know how much you know, you are American. Do you know, did you study Edgar Allan Poe? I mean, there's an Edgar Allan Poe quote at the beginning, isn't there?
I forget what it is.
I can't remember what it is, but we talked so much so far on this podcast about how so many ghost stories are influenced by M.R. James and Dickens and very British Gothic writers.
Yeah.
And this feels like a very much, I guess, an American ghost story in some ways, by the setting and the fact that it's Edgar Allan Poe, you know. But I don't know, to be honest, I don't know enough about Edgar Allan Poe to say anything more.
I mean, the stuff I do know isn't anywhere in the realm of ghost stories like this.
Yes.
I mean, I know things like Hot Frog and the stuff I studied in school, or the stuff that Vincent Price did in the 60s.
Exactly,
things
the
like
Roger
that.
Corman movies.
Right,
that's all
exactly.
I know.
That I know.
Yeah.
It's one of those I've always wanted to know more. I just haven't gotten around to it. But I actually do think it's a very, because there's something very British about not just that it's happening in Britain, but there's something very British about The Innocents.
Oh yes.
Whereas
it's the buttoned up, repressed, nothing is talked about. It's that element of it that is British, I think.
And I think the exact opposite end of that spectrum is The Fog, where a 20-year-old girl's hitchhiking and she gets in the car with a guy who she's never met. And this is the 80s, like when serial killers were all about picking up girls on the road. And the first thing she says, or one of the first things she says is, "Are you a weirdo?"
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a weirdo too, or something like that.
Yeah.
And you immediately, you're like, yeah, you want that person to live.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. It's so much more. And of course, the difference is, of course, as well, that some of these other ones were set in Victorian era or whatever. These are much more present day, but they're much more, all the characters are much more liberal, progressive, sexual, sexually active, all that kind of thing.
Just even the Stevie Wayne character. Is it Stevie? I think her last name's Wayne. The Stevie Wayne character, it's just, she is the chorus of the film, really. And she just kind of, she's... oh man, what is her name? The narrator, the radio host on The Warriors. She is the eyes. She's experiencing. Of course, they're all experiencing everything with the audience. Yeah. But she's more of an audience than a participant. And but there's something very sexy about her voice.
Yes.
Ahoy, mateys. This is KAB Antonio Bay. Stevie Wayne here, beaming a signal across the sea. To the men of the seagrass, 15 miles out tonight, a warm hello, and keep a watch out for that fog bank heading in from the east. Now, in the meantime, relax with me while I play this song from the Coupe de Ville.
But again, these characters, in as little time as you get with all of these characters, they do all have elements to them. You have this kind of impression of her straight away as this sexy late night radio host, and then you see, oh, she's a mother, and she's got this, and she's got that, and so these characters have more to them than actually even more than Halloween characters do, I think, which is the main issue I have with Halloween, which is that I kind of want all of Laurie's friends to die because I find them so cardboard cutout irritating.
I've always had a thing for Annie.
Yeah, but that's the thing. These characters, they're all a little bit more. There's something, even though the film is almost like a kid's campfire tale, there's also, you can tell there's something a little bit more mature about his filmmaking in this one than even 2 years earlier with
Absolutely.
Halloween.
I think the characters are a little more recognizable. Like you're like, oh yeah, I know somebody. I think the business between Janet Leigh and Nancy Loomis character, it's great.
Yes.
It's not really driving anything forward, but it's moments of, for me anyway, moments of levity in a pretty intense are going to be intense film. And I think it's great that Nancy Loomis took a role like that, and she nails it.
Yeah,
she's very underappreciated in that role, in general. I think. I think she retired soon after that.
She didn't do much else, did she?
Well, I mean, I think she was married to Tommy Lee Wallace, director of Halloween 3.
Yeah.
And I think he was also Carpenter's
editor or something like that, was he?
Yeah, I think he was like not production designer, but like first AD or something like that. Yeah, I think I like moments like that. I like moments of levity. I like moments of just realness.
Yes,
I guess.
I think it's all important, actually. I think it is. It's like what Kim Newman said to me on the very first episode of this podcast, the scares are so dependent on you caring about what happens to the characters.
Of course.
And he cited Halloween as an example of, why it's a better slasher movie than most other slasher movies is you care about Laurie Strode. Jamie Lee Curtis is the reason that film works emotionally for people.
That's true.
And it's the same with this, definitely,
No one really, I mean, of course people die, but none of that ensemble outside of Hal Holbrook. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm spoiling this for anybody.
We do spoiler warning at the beginning. That's fine.
Nobody outside of Hal Holbrook, if I'm not mistaken, dies, right?
No.
None of this main.
No.
Something came out of the fog and tried to destroy us. In one moment, it vanished. But if this has been anything but a nightmare, and if we don't wake up to find ourselves safe in our beds, it could come again.
I don't think a movie like The Fog would be made today. I haven't seen the remake.
I haven't either. Apparently, it's terrible. Isn't it?
I hear it's really bad, and I'm like, why? You have perfect source material.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a weird way, The Mist feels, obviously because mist and fog, but also those movies have similar feels to them of these kind of monsters that are consumed within this mist and hitting a town, and this kind of ensemble cast coming together. Obviously, it's very different in what happens in the story,
right?
But it almost feels to me like it would be
kind of like Stephen King's The Fog.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I love The Mist, though.
The Mist is just
Great.
Don't
you ever watched the black and white version?
Yes. Much better, because
it's amazing.
The effects look better in black and white as well.
Yeah. I think he shot it for black and white, if I'm not mistaken,
because he wanted
to make one of those. B-50s
Atomic Monster.
Atomic Monster, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, such a perfect movie. Absolutely brilliant. Wonderful. So The Fog, I mean, all these years later, do you think it still holds up?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think it holds its own with most horror films today.
Brilliant. And then, so final question for you. What is your favourite ghost movie? Do you have one?
I do. Oh man, I have to say The Others.
Yeah,
I love The Others.
Such a good choice.
Yeah, I think I've said before, I'm not a big fan of films that rely on a twist, but I think that's a twist you kind of is there from the beginning, and you just go for this. It works.
Even if you know the twist. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Everything about that movie is like sumptuous and wonderful and creepy. The house, the mist,
it's beautiful.
The characters, Nicole Kidman, the servants, everything about that film. The children who are allergic to sunlight. I mean, there's all these elements that are just brilliant, creepy factors.
Absolutely.
But I won't say any more in case people haven't seen that. But
what's your favorite ghost movie?
My favourite, I think it's The Innocents for me, which is very similar to the others, actually.
I think that's definitely what they were going for.
Yeah. Amazing. If people want to find you then online, social media, that kind of thing, where
we're at Big Film Quiz on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm also at Real Bryan Ryan on Twitter.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A huge thank you there to the fantastic Bryan Ryan. And don't forget, if you are in London, get involved. Come along to one of his movie quizzes. They're great fun. You can find all the details for that in the show notes this week. Okay, so the next film I'm going to be discussing is the brilliant Poltergeist. Now, this was written and produced by Steven Spielberg, but directed by Tobe Hooper. A match made in heaven. And joining me to discuss this movie is a horror filmmaker. I'm very, very excited to have her on the show. The brilliant Prano Bailey Bond. Hello, Prano.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome.
You are currently in the midst of kind of locking yourself away doing some writing. Is that right at the moment?
That's right, yes. So I've emerged from my hermit writing hole to come and speak to you.
This is so cool. So tell me for a little bit about, for people that don't know who you are, tell me a little bit about you and what you do.
So I'm a filmmaker and I'm a director, and most of my work is dark genre. So I've made a number of short films and I'm currently writing my debut feature.
Amazing. Anything you can tell me about this debut feature yet?
It is set in the early 80s against the backdrop of the social hysteria surrounding video nasties. And it's called Censor, and it follows a female film censor who starts to become strangely affected by the films she watches at work.
Awesome. Very, very cool. So I just watched your short film Nasty, which was fantastic, by the way. Absolutely loved it. So this is like, and again, that's set on a similar backdrop, isn't it? It's that kind of, is it actually specified as to when it's set? Because I didn't actually see it kind of specified, or was it?
It's not specified, but it's set in 1982.
Right, because obviously it figured, because it's got that kind of video nasty backdrop, and it's got that kind of, it reminded me almost of something a little bit like Videodrome or something like that. Yeah. Is that kind of what you were going for?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the thing that inspired Nasty really was the social hysteria surrounding kind of VHS horror at the time, and the Daily Mail news articles, like taken over by something evil from your TV set, and rape of our children's minds. And I kind of wanted to take that kind of idea and see what it would be like if it was a little bit true.
We've been waiting for you, son.
For me, horror is the most imaginative and free genre to work in. You're not kind of constrained by reality in horror. You can just kind of let your mind go wild and be quite wrong sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Get it all out of your system.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you are, judging by what you do, you are a horror filmmaker. I mean, has horror always been a big part of your life? Has that always been something you've been passionate about?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of something that's always been there in my family. I wouldn't say my family are as big horror fans as I am, but I sort of was brought up on a diet of David Lynch films, and I watched Twin Peaks when it first came out on TV. It was my treat to stay up late and watch it. And I consider Lynch to be horror, not traditional horror, but definitely dark and twisted and terrifying. Some of the most terrifying stuff.
Fire Walk with Me is up there in the scariest ever sort of movies for me.
Yeah, I was absolutely gutted when my copy of Fire Walk with Me got eaten by the VHS player.
No!
I was like traumatized. Oh. But I've got an older brother and sister, so obviously the influence of what they were watching, you want to be watching that stuff as well. And then if they're babysitting me and my mum's out, then I'd just watch whatever they watched.
So do you remember what your first ever horror movie was and how old you were?
I do remember a weird experience that involved a horror film, but I don't think it was the first horror I ever watched. I remember we used to have a video shop in the local town, and it was called Elved's. I grew up in Wales, and Elved was the guy who ran it. Right. So, and it was like this really pokey little video shop, and me and my mum went in and rented a film from there, and I remember taking it home and sitting down and putting it in the video player, and this man came up on screen, and it was Simon Bates, and he was suited. I'd never seen him before. Suited, sitting behind this desk. And he said something that I didn't really understand, but it was to do with to do with being prosecuted for watching this film, or if you let somebody watch this film under the age of then you will be prosecuted. And I was absolutely terrified, and I thought that my mum was going to get prosecuted. And I ran into the kitchen, and she remembers it as well. I ran into the kitchen and I was like, Mum, are you going to get prosecuted? And I almost remember the image in my imagination of the police like coming up her driveway to take her away. Brilliant. And she said she wouldn't get prosecuted, and it was absolutely fine. I think the film was The Woman in White, so I think it was like a 12 or something. I must have been,
very
obviously
young.
Quite young.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And she said that it would be fine. I could watch the film if I wanted, and I watched it, and it didn't scare me because I knew that wasn't real. But Simon Bates was real.
That is brilliant. I think that's the first story I've heard so far of somebody getting scared by Simon Bates. Just for people listening who don't know, Simon Bates, is this right? He was the kind of BBFC bloke that would say the video you're about to watch is certified 18 or whatever, and would tell you what to expect or why you should or shouldn't be watching it. Is that right?
Yeah, he had these big 80s glasses and this like brown combed hair, and he sat behind this desk, and he was so well spoken and authoritative in his suit.
It's an offence for your shop to supply an 18 video to anyone under that age, so don't ask them to break the law. An 18 film will certainly have an adult theme and might well contain strong scenes of sex or violence, which could be quite graphic. It may also contain some very explicit language, which will frequently mean sexual swear words.
That's brilliant. There you go. This is like all these things kind of drilled into your mind about censorship. And all these things must have leaked through into your filmmaking and writing there.
And just the whole sort of the format of video as well. You know, when you live in the middle of nowhere and you record stuff off the telly on video, and, you know, and you just can watch things over and over again. I didn't have a cinema that close to me. No. So I just used to watch the same films on repeat. And it was at a time where you couldn't get, Netflix or stuff online. No. There was no internet. So I was just sort of stuck with the same films that I'd just devour over and over and over again.
And it's there was something, we all look back on it quite fondly and nostalgically, I think, don't we? And, I was talking to Michael Blythe about this, and we were saying, like, the joy of going to a video shop and just like perusing the horror section and finding like the most disturbing looking sort of front covers or artwork or video art. That's all gone now, isn't it? It's kind of a shame, or probably not a shame, because probably half of those movies were terrible. And you judge them by their front cover. But those days are just gone now, aren't they?
Well, those front covers were like the illicit thing that drew you in, and that was what Nasty was about as well. It was like this sort of grey suburban Britain, and then this like lucid, like colourful video cover that kind of went, oh, this is an exciting world, come here, and I guess we all kind of felt that a little bit.
What are your thoughts on this kind of subgenre of horror, the haunting, the ghost, the paranormal, that kind of thing?
I absolutely love it. I think it taps into a fear that we don't understand. It's something we don't understand. And it could be out there, it could be real, or maybe it isn't. And I think that taps into a different kind of fear to, straight up violence.
Totally.
And it's such an imaginative, creative, realm of horror, I think.
What is it about these movies, do you think?
Under the Shadow is one that I saw recently, and I watched that at home on Netflix with the original language on, not the dubbed American version, which is horrific in a bad way. So I watched that at home, and I think I was alone, and I went downstairs afterwards, and it was the first time in years that I was frightened in the house and frightened of going upstairs in the dark, and it connected me back to that childhood fear that's quite exciting. The fear of the dark, the fear of what's around the corner, and the unknown, and the thing you can't control. Well, this is in Poltergeist as well, but so many of them, this idea of, what happens to us, when we die, and do we get trapped somewhere, and will we be forever haunted ourselves as ghosts? And so many ghosts are haunted characters that have something that they didn't fulfill in their life, or they're not sure where they're meant to be and they're lost. And I guess that's got something to do with our fear of what we do or don't accomplish in our lives.
Absolutely.
I think kind of Black Mirror's tapping into that a little bit now as well, being trapped in a digital haunting.
That is like properly scary Black Mirror, isn't it? Because it's not just that it's scary on a kind of superficial level when you watch it. It's just the whole idea of every single episode. I just think, this could happen, and it's truly horrific.
Yeah.
It's so dark.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Metalhead, is it Metalhead?
Yeah,
the
I
one
haven't
with
seen
Maxine
that one yet.
Peake.
Yeah,
that one, because that wasn't. It was weird. That wasn't my favourite episode, but I watched it before I went to bed, and then I went to bed and had nightmares about that were connected to. Yeah. I won't say too much, but some of the stuff that happens in it. But it taps into something that's sort of somewhere between supernatural and technology, which again is sort of similar to Poltergeist.
Yeah. The house looks just like the one next to it. And the one next to that. And the one next to that. A young couple live in it.
Give Ken a kiss.
You are so obnoxious.
With their 3 children.
Poor Ken. Trying to chew each bite 10 times.
And something more.
They're here.
Sweetie, remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said you were here?
Uh-huh.
Well, who did you mean? Who's here?
TV people.
Something's funny going on here next door. Something,
We were wondering if maybe you had experienced any disturbances lately.
What kind of disturbances?
So, Poltergeist is a film from 1982. It's about a family who move into a new house, and the television starts speaking to the daughter who gets trapped inside it, and the family somehow have to get her back, and they have employ ghost hunters or whatever you call them to get her back and rescue her.
Yeah, fantastic. It's just like a classic kind of American haunted house movie, isn't it? Do you remember like the first time you watched it, how young you were, or where you were when you first watched it?
So I've been trying to remember this. I remember being with my best friend Katie, who we grew up together, and we both had older brother and sisters, and we weren't allowed to watch Poltergeist.
Really?
And I remember sneaking around with the VHS, basically going, let's watch this. And we were with someone who was much younger than us. I don't actually remember watching the film. I just remember the fact that we were doing it in secret.
Yeah.
And we got into trouble with Katie's mum. That's what I remember.
Yeah.
So I don't really remember it. It's sort of almost like it's always been part of my life.
Yeah. So you a fan of the movie then?
Yeah, and a Poltergeist 2 as well.
Yeah. Got that terrifying character, that guy, whatever his name is.
I can't remember his name, but he's
we all know that guy, because if you've seen it, you'll know who I'm talking about. That terrifying man. Yeah. I'm a big fan as well. I think the first time I watched it, I was reluctant, because I think I was a sort of teenager, and at the time I only wanted to watch like the really hardcore scary stuff, and I remember always seeing Poltergeist as being almost like a family horror film. I thought it was going to be a Steven Spielberg almost family friendly ghost movie that wasn't actually going to be scary, and I was kind of like, oh, whatever, put it on, and then was genuinely terrified by it and was really kind of blown away by it. But it had that air of kind of like, oh, it's not really a horror film for me at the time, I remember thinking. But it really is, actually, and it's properly scary, I think.
Yeah, I think there's these strange moments in it. There's some really iconic images, like the girl against the static TV, which is so haunting.
They're here.
And then there's the kind of really odd moment when there's the guy in the mirror. When
that's my favourite bit.
Yeah, and it feels like almost like a different film in a way, but because it's like such different special effects, it's all in camera.
Yeah.
And it gets really, really gory at that bit.
Yeah, really nasty.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that makes it feel like a family film is the music.
Yeah.
Because it's almost Disney sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It is. But then actually, it's also very creepy at the same time, that music, isn't it? It's a really good kind of balance. And it got nominated for an Oscar for Best Score, actually.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
I just found out. I looked this movie up just before we started talking about it. It got nominated for 3 Oscars for sort of Best Sound Editing, Best Special sort of Visual... special effects, best special effects, and best original score. Yeah,
wow.
Which is amazing, really.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely had that kind of... It has that Steven Spielberg sheen, doesn't it? That's the thing. It was kind of a little bit more mainstream than your average horror movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the family and their warmth are like one of the kind of one of the things that really draws you into the film, but also gives it this kind of, I don't know, nicer feel, doesn't it? We're not in Texas Chainsaw Massacre land like Tobe Hooper's.
Of course. And that's the thing. I mean, I keep calling it a Spielberg film. It's not. It's Tobe Hooper, isn't it? It's just, it feels so much like a Steven Spielberg film. I mean, I know that there's a lot of kind of people sort of go one way or the other as to whether or not Spielberg did really direct it, because I think he was not allowed to direct it, was he? Even though it was his idea, it was his movie. Is that
he
right?
was directing E.T. and he had a clause in his contract saying he couldn't direct anything else. So Tobe Hooper came on board to direct it. But yeah, I suppose some people, it does have a real kind of E.T. vibe to it.
100%.
The family, the sheen of everything, the way it looks. But then, if Spielberg was a producer, then he may have had all the kind of final decisions on crew and certain aspects of like how it was shot and things. So that could have fed into it. It's a really tricky one.
It is a tricky one, and it was his story. He wrote it as well, Spielberg. So you almost wonder, was it almost like TV? That Tobe Hooper was a director for hire who just came on board and just did exactly. He just fulfilled the tasks, but it was Spielberg's vision, I guess, or something. Who knows?
That would make sense. That would make sense. I mean, it definitely has quite a different feel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, it does.
Which is, another one of my favourite horror films.
Me too. It's my favourite. But actually, like, it does... Weirdly, though, it also, like, balances that line of being... Because you think of Spielberg as a very, very safe filmmaker. You're always in kind of safe hands, even with horror and scary stuff. And he is quite good at doing scary stuff. But... Tobe Hooper is a filmmaker you feel is very unsafe. Like, you don't really know where he's taking you and how. And there are moments in Poltergeist, like that bit in the mirror, where you just think, what the fuck is happening now? It's bizarre.
That feels like a Tobe Hooper moment, doesn't it? That's the bit where you go, oh, he got to do that scene how he wanted it to do it.
Yeah, we're in someone else's hands now at this point.
Yeah, it's so bizarre, that moment in the mirror, and the meat and the maggots. I mean, that's the bit that really kind of is squirmy and gets on your skin, and it's gross, whereas the rest of it is more chilling.
Absolutely,
frightening, and
yeah, definitely. So we got, obviously, it's all centered around this like very kind of happy family, and actually it takes quite a long time to sort of for anything scary to happen, doesn't it? We spend a lot of time just with this family, and they're kind of the most normal quintessential American family in a way, aren't they? You can imagine. That's what kind of struck me watching it again the other night. It was like, they are like, it is like textbook sort of nuclear family.
Yeah,
isn't it,
totally.
I think the storm's going to pass us.
How do you know?
Because I can count. You know what you do? When you see the lightning, you count until you hear the thunder. If you can count higher each time, that means the storm's moving away from us. Want to try it?
And they're all so happy, and the kids squabble, but it's all kind of quite friendly, and and mum and dad are really happy, and they're quite cool. They like smoke weed and have sex, and although maybe that's part of the problem in horror territory.
That tends to be. Exactly.
But I think as a kid, one of the things that, like, watching it again, I kind of remembered how the kids in the film they have this sixth sense, don't they? They know what's going to happen. They kind of almost foretell what's going to happen. They warn the parents who don't listen, and that happens a few times throughout, especially at the beginning. So that's the kind of forebodingness early on that the boy Robbie is like, I don't like the tree outside, and Dad's trying to make him feel better about it, and he's just not taking the kids seriously. And I think as a kid that that taps into something, because you think, yeah, I know, as a kid you think you know more than the adults do, and you can see things differently, and they just don't understand the world the way you do.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And that is another thing, isn't it? It's another real Spielberg-y thing, I think, that he taps into like this real like child's eyes view almost, like, yeah, the things that you remember being scared of as a kid, like the tree that makes shadows outside your window, or the clown doll, or the sort of closet with the light on, or whatever it might be, like all these like little things that you think, that is scary for kids. I can imagine watching this film, because I wasn't that young when I watched it, and I can imagine it must be absolutely terrifying if you watch it as a child, considering all this stuff, all the scary stuff happens to kids, doesn't it, in this movie as well. It's pretty brutal. And you do get a few, like you say, you get a few kind of sort of signs at the beginning. The poor bird dies, the bird gets it fairly early on.
It does, and that's all quite like thematic as well, isn't it, in terms of, it's so funny, isn't it? The moment when the kid catches mum about to flush the bird down the toilet.
It's so good.
And you're like, no. And it's kind of like, the parents, the grown-ups have no respect for the dead, and absolutely. The kids do. Again, we're going back to the kids being the wise ones. And then she makes mum give the bird a proper burial, which then ends up getting dug up anyway later on, just before kind of it all kicks off.
Yeah.
If I should die before I wake, Dad, I pray the Lord my soul to take.
That was lovely. Lovely, honey.
I'm a goldfish now.
Also, I do think it's interesting what you said earlier about, the parents have sex, they do drugs, and even though this doesn't follow the kind of slasher movie rules, I do think there is an element to this family being punished, not so much for their bad behaviour maybe as much as their sort of greed. It's, obviously we're sort of in the beginning of Reagan America here. There's actually a moment where the dad is reading the book about Ronald Reagan, sort of as if to say he really looks up to him, this symbol of kind of capitalism and greed and wealth. And you can see that they kind of live in that sort of world. This family, they've got this new house that's been built on this Indian burial ground already. So there's this kind of sense of, we don't care, we don't honour what came before us. And they have so much stuff. You see the opening moment there as the dog just kind of wanders around the house while everyone else is asleep. They've left the TV running. They've got crap everywhere. Everywhere you look in the kids' room, there are toys, action figures, Star Wars. Again, it's this kind of consumerism, capitalism at play. Food bags, empty bag of crisps that are being kicked around. Just so much stuff. Even the idea that as soon as the pet dies, rather than mourn it or really give a shit, they're like, let's buy a new one, and they replace it with a goldfish. And there's this kind of sense of kind of human compassion, I suppose, has been replaced with just money and greed and capitalism. I do think that there is an element of a sort of message about that in the film.
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, the greed of humanity, and that's kind of comes through in the dad's boss. Mr. Teague. Is it Teague? And the dad, obviously, he's got this house through his job, and he's renting all these places out. And there's that moment again with the TV. When they're trying to watch the football game,
yes, brilliant.
They're trying to, I mean, that's such a clever moment in the film, because it ties in both the supernatural element that's going to happen with the TV, but also this idea of like the territory war, which is kind of between the living and the dead,
Yeah, so true, And the fact that all of these people kind of live on top of each other as well in this new little, like, town, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. And then obviously that kind of develops into this idea that it's been built on an ancient burial ground, or at least the place where they are has been built on an ancient burial ground, and then they're planning on developing a new one up the hill, and he says something about, but won't it be a bit of an eyesore looking at a mountain covered in houses? And he said, well, that doesn't matter, because you'll be up here looking down on them. And it's just this sort of selfishness and territory and greed, and I definitely think that that's kind of at the heart of it. And the opening music being the kind of United States national anthem with it's such a weird close-up of the TV screen. It almost makes you feel like, hang on, something's gone wrong here.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, which is really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then obviously Poltergeist 2, we have an Indian character, and it kind of goes a bit more into, what the Americans did to the Indians, and that guilt, I suppose, is sort of all part of it, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And like there is definitely an element of that with so many of these kind of American ghost stories, like it is funny, like when you look at them around the world, different sort of ghost movies, Under the Shadow, and obviously what the backdrop of Iran there and everything, but then also you look at the sort of British ghost stories, and they're usually about kind of repressed sort of sex or something like that, the innocence of those types of movies. And America, because we've just done The Shining, obviously, and that's obviously a hotel on an Indian burial ground as well, and there's a lot of that to it. There's a lot of kind of greedy Americans come in and fuck over, nature or, whoever was there before or whatever, greed is the way that they...
It's weird that we don't look at it a bit more in British horror, because we only ever look at our own repression rather than all the terrible things that our culture has done. It's quite strange that we almost reject going there.
You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones!
What's your sort of favourite moment of the film, or favourite moments?
God, I think so much of it is with the little girl, Carol Ann, and
who's a brilliant actress as well.
She's amazing. I mean, they're all brilliant. I love all the characters, but there's something quite strange about her, the way she, her blonde hair and her little tiny teeth, and her hair's so shiny. It's like the shiniest hair in the whole entire universe.
And for a little girl, it's quite a kind of severe haircut as well, isn't it? It's like very, it's interesting.
And then her getting sucked into this strange other world, and her voice coming through from the other side, and that's the stuff that I think is Poltergeist to me.
Absolutely.
And it's the chilling Poltergeist, and
it's what everyone remembers, isn't it? That image of her in the TV and all that kind of thing. And again, the television is just so... It's the epitome, isn't it, of this kind of consumerism, this mindless consumerism, This family are all glued to their television sets to the point where the TV is actually what destroys them. And there was a lot of this going on at this... in this era, the early 80s, you had movies like Videodrome as well. And it's something that we've seen all the way through horror up until sort of things like Ringu in the 90s and beyond, that this kind of technology is going to lead to our downfall.
Would your family welcome a serious investigation of these disturbances by someone who can make first-hand observations?
The doctor knows we don't care about the disturbances. Pounding and the flash, the screaming, the music. I just want you to find our little girl.
And also what adds to this kind of idea of science meeting the paranormal, that's something that we're going to see a lot after this movie through the 80s and beyond. This is one of the first movies that really taps into that, where you've got these kind of wacky ghost hunters that turn up, that all have all their machinery and everything, and you've got that woman Tangina, who is a brilliant character.
Don't mind hanging back. You're jamming my frequencies.
Yeah, she's great. They're so funny as well. Like, I don't know, it's and all of them. The humour in the whole film
all the way through,
is brilliant, and the warmth again. Because I remember Dr. Lesh and is it Diane, the mum. There's these like jumps in time, and there's a moment where Dr. Lesh is leaving, and they have this hug. Yeah. And it's so warm, and it makes it feel really real, like you're really going through this with this family. I mean, obviously it's slightly dated now, but it still feels truthful and natural. Yeah. You're really and then later when they're being made to shout at Carol Ann, and you just think, God, these parents. Horrible. I mean, as a kid, I don't think that hit me, but now watching it as an adult, you think, oh my God, you're trying to get your kid back, and you have to be horrible to them, and this might be the last thing they ever hear of your voice. And there's so much kind of truth and pain in those moments, but I think they come to life because of the humour and the warmth that's dotted throughout, and these kind of, like you say, funny people that come in to help them who almost don't really have a clue.
No one really knows. Yeah, and it's true, actually, that's so true, because I think there's all that stuff, like we said, that will terrify you as a child, and then when you watch it again as an adult, there's kind of a whole new layer to it that scares you. The thought of being a parent and losing a child, or losing control, or your greed, or you're somehow the one that causes it. And again, it's your children that suffer for it, and that kind of thing. So, and do you think that, like, because we're sort of going forward now, after what we're looking at after this is kind of a lot of the big mainstream movies of the 80s that are a little bit more family friendly about ghosts. So you've got things like Ghostbusters and Beetlejuice and various different movies like that are kind of horror comedies, accessible, a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more accessible. I mean, do you think Poltergeist had anything to do with that trend?
It's weird, isn't it? Because Poltergeist is it's 1982.
Yeah.
And I think, because over here, obviously, my obsession now is the sort of VHS, the birth of VHS over here, and the VHS horror, social madness that went on, and the fear around kind of videos, which you can see in Poltergeist in terms of like this fear of technology and being trapped in the TV, and kind of Carol Ann's obsession with the TV. But if you think about when Steven Spielberg would have written that would have probably been like, around 90, it would have been like early 80s, late 70s.
Yeah.
So sort of slightly ahead of his time there. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, and there was something going on earlier, but it seems slightly ahead of the time. And then you've got some stuff like things like The Evil Dead. I think it was like, looking at how horror and comedy really really work together, and maybe everybody just relaxed a little bit.
Yeah, it's so true. An American Werewolf in London, 81 as well. It's an incredible era, actually. The sort of late 70s, early 80s. No matter what sort of subgenre you look at, because there's this amazing, in the slashers, this boom that we've looked at, and then you've got these incredible ghost movies of this time, where you've got filmmakers like Tobe Hooper and Spielberg, and John Carpenter's The Fog, and all these incredible movies, and then you've got all this kind of body horror stuff like The Thing and Alien and Videodrome, and maybe it's to do with the video boom or something, and in that there was just more being made, there was just a greater volume or something, I don't know.
Yeah, it's because there was a certain freedom then as well, like if horror's not being taken seriously, maybe the commercial sort of marketing side of filmmaking hasn't sunk its teeth into it yet. I mean, I know Spielberg's kind of obviously like at the heart of that in lots of ways, but maybe there was a sort of independence and freedom that allowed these kind of stories to really come through, and then as they get more and more popular and people can see that they make money, then everyone jumps on that kind of bandwagon, don't they? And it's like a new generation of filmmakers coming through at that time that are kind of trying to do something different, maybe.
Heather O'Rourke was just 5 years old when director Steven Spielberg cast her as Carol Ann in the movie Poltergeist. She went on to star in Poltergeist 2 and had finished filming Poltergeist 3 when she died Monday at age 12.
There's this weird thing, isn't there, with these movies that, they've become kind of infamous for having this almost like curse in terms of what's happened to a couple of the actors in it. Really, really tragically, the actress who played the older sister, Dominique Dunn, died like the year it came out, didn't she?
Strangled by an abusive ex, I think. I mean, I don't know if that's factually correct, but that's what I'm
pretty sure
know.
That's how the story goes, definitely.
And then the girl who plays Carol Ann got Crohn's disease and died. And then in Poltergeist 2, the actor who plays the creepy guy whose name we can't remember, he died during filming of bowel cancer or stomach cancer.
It's weird, isn't it? It's a weird thing. And it's one of those things that people, it's like The Crow or something like that. It's like one of those things that people know those stories almost as much as the film itself.
Yeah, it makes the film even more like
chilling. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Especially
really
because of Carol Ann, and so much of it centered around the children and a threat to the children. It's a really strange
watching
thing.
it, knowing that now, there's moments that you just think, God, this is... I don't know, there's this whole thing of like losing her to the land of the dead and you know, and don't go near the light and everything, and watching the parents in that, it's so strange.
Really brilliant performances though, all round from all of them. I thought I really loved the parents as well. They felt like real parents, didn't they, as well? That's the thing. He was like the most dad, you know.
He's
you can imagine.
kind of useless. Like, he doesn't do anything,
dad-like.
which is completely dad-like. And Mum kind of does everything, doesn't she? She holds it all together, and then he just, I think the only thing he does is tell her off at the end, you know, and he doesn't even want to do that, but he just, he's kind of, he doesn't do much, and then
he feels a lot of guilt through most of it, doesn't he?
He snoozes in front of the TV a bit.
He helps the kid when he's scared of the thunder.
That's true.
There's a classic dad moment
That's
there.
True. He's not a bad dad. He's just a kind of, you know, sort of lazy dad.
Yes,
isn't he?
it's that kind of lazy, greedy American family type thing. He's kind of the embodiment of it in a way, isn't he?
But I think so much of the, you know, I mean, obviously the performances are great, but the writing, I haven't read the script, but I imagine that the writing, it was, you know, there on the page, the kind of that family connection. And but Mum's so believable. Just thinking about kind of her tidying up and being in the kitchen, and then there's that moment with the chairs, isn't there? That's the first time something supernatural happens. And you're waiting for something to happen, and then Carol Ann's hand just comes up behind and grabs her, and then she turns around and all the chairs are on top of each other, and there's no kind of... There's no getting around that this is weird. Yeah,
it's brilliant. That's a really well done, kind of looks like it's all done in one fluid take, and it's really cleverly done. And also, I loved that then it's just like, right, there's a ghost. Like, they all just kind of accept it. There's so many of these films are all about, often the woman is, no one believes her. There's this kind of idea of the sort of hysterical woman at the centre of it, who no one believes that she's in a haunted house. And this is like, the mother sees this happen, that's it. There's that bit when she shows him that thing where the chair gets dragged across the floor and then they put their child. I thought that was hilarious. And again, quite kind of foreboding moment where they're like, let's test this out by putting our daughter on this like danger spot and watch her get dragged across the floor.
Totally.
But that's it. They all just then know and believe that there's a poltergeist. And it's then that's it.
By the time the ghost hunters come round, they're just used to living. They're like, oh yeah, this happens, and then that happens, and then the lights flicker at this moment. And, you know, it's like they've kind of become accustomed to this person who's come and moved into their house. And those are the brilliant kind of jumps in time that let us really settle into the normality of having a poltergeist.
Yeah, exactly. And it used to be, I think, as well, that a lot of these ghost movies were so much about not seeing much, or, you know, you'd get like, you know, you'd be scared by sort of a door opening slightly, or sound design more than what you'd see, whereas this is very much about spectacle. It's like practical effects and special effects and lights and lots of things happening on screen that you actually see.
Some of the effects are quite cool, I think. Like there's that sky, when the sky goes, you know, all different amazing colours.
Yeah, it's really like, cool.
I think, you know, now they still look a bit dated, but at the time they must have looked amazing.
Absolutely.
I mean,
so any, like, watching it again now as well, as an adult, as a filmmaker, I mean, is there anything now that you don't like about it? Any negatives?
Gosh.
I mean, do you think it's dated at all? I mean, I suppose it has dated to a point because it's so about the 80s, but...
It has. I don't know. I mean, it's so shiny. Like, you know, I watch a lot of films from that time, and it doesn't feel as dated as a lot of other. You know, you watch stuff that's just super hammy. You know, I was watching Basket Case the other day, and some of the acting in that is just so bad. You're like, okay, who did you employ to be this actor? Like, I mean, it's a brilliant film, and I love it utterly, but. Yeah, it's just, they're just literally like bits of wood saying the lines, and you can 100%. See where the director said, take a pause between these two lines of dialogue. And
which
none
is
of
very
that...
common in a lot of horror, isn't it, to be honest?
I'm trying to think, is there anything I don't like about Poltergeist?
No, I mean,
I don't think there is.
No, it's like, it's one of those movies that is so, like you say, as horror fans, you're used to sometimes a bit of clunky acting or a bit of clunky directing or editing or effect. But this movie does actually have all of that stuff in high quality, doesn't it? That's the thing. It's
And even towards the end, it's got the bits where you shout at the screen going, no, don't do that. Because there's the bit where so everything's finished and they've got Carol Ann back. And then Dad goes out and they're going to move out of the house. But he says, okay, well, just let the kids have a nap. And she puts the kids to bed in the room where the ghost was in the cupboard.
Would you ever leave your kids alone in that room
And then she goes and has a bath.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are you doing? No. Those kids should be downstairs and you should be watching them sleep. You would not. And that's the brilliant thing about horror, that it gets you shouting at the screen. And you are at that bit. So I think Kim Newman in his review, he said something about it's the only successful horror film where no one dies.
Yeah, so true.
And I mean, there's lots of dead people in it, but no one dies. And I think that's great about it as well.
Amazing, yeah, it's so cool. It's so good. And it does have, that moment then when she leaves him alone in the bedroom. It has, the big jump scare with the clown under the beds. It's so iconic now and has a lot to answer for, actually, I think, that jump scare. Because now if you look at most ghost movies, it's that moment again and again and again, isn't it? It's like that. Scoots, it's like that kind of, I look under the bed, I'll turn back and now it's behind me or whatever, There's a lot of that going on.
The evolution of jump scares.
Oh my god! There's exactly.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of got it all. It's got the gory, maggoty bit. It's got the chilling supernatural side. It's got the bits where you shout at the screen and the jump scares.
Yeah,
and
it's got characters that you care about, which helps as well. Who you want to survive. But I think if there's one thing for me that I realised when watching it again, and maybe it's just because I've seen it a lot of times now, but it's like everything is very, very, and again, it goes in that kind of, it's a very safe movie, but everything is very over-explained. There's like one section where they're all whispering to each other and explaining what it means to be a spirit and leaving things behind, and it goes on and on and on, and then there's another bit when another medium comes in and explains about the other realm and how to get them back and what it means and what you have to do, and there's a lot of like characters explaining things to one another.
Yeah. There is no death. It is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
I think if that happened in a contemporary film, I'd feel exactly the same.
Yeah.
But I still love it in that, because they've got this, it's like this really Disney-esque music in the background of this woman talking about death and ghosts and spirits, and it makes it all quite like light and magical and weird. And I'd almost love to see the film with some really dark music and see how it changed the movie.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it is almost like a kid's film. It's directed and scored like a children's film, and yet it's terrifying. It's really weird mix.
Yeah, totally. But I think I even love those bits, even though I wouldn't love those bits if it was like,
if you're watching it now as a cynical adult in a cynical 2018.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Fantastic. So big thumbs up then for Poltergeist.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It was the highest grossing horror of 1982, which was also the year I was born. So I feel like it's kind of
a good year as well, wasn't it, for horror?
A good year.
Wasn't that also? I think that's also the year of The Thing. I mean, there was a lot of good horror around that time.
Yeah. So I'm proud to have been born in that year.
Excellent. Very good. Amazing. So before we finish, just a few quick questions I ask everybody. I mean, what is your favourite horror movie?
Well, the thing is, it's The Shining, I would say. However, I think one of my favourite films ever is Blue Velvet, and I would say that has an element of horror to it.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to push the boundary say Blue Velvet, because let's face it, Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet is probably the most terrifying character in the history of cinema.
Yeah.
So
I'm the same. I have like a David Lynch clause where it's like, well, my favourite horror movie, strict horror movie, would be maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but if you count Lost Highway, that's my favourite. Yeah. So yeah,
that's a very close second.
Yeah.
Love Lost Highway.
It's incredible.
As well.
Or Eraserhead. I mean, they're all of them.
Yeah.
All of them. You know, you'd kind of lump together, and they're up there for me.
Yeah.
And then equally, this might be a similar answer, but what is the scariest movie you've ever seen? What's the most scared you've ever been watching a movie?
The kind of fear is different for different films. So the thing that scared me the most as a kid was the backwards talking dwarf in Twin Peaks. And it gave me really bad nightmares.
Yeah.
I think the film that's upset me the most, which isn't necessarily in a good way, was a Serbian film.
Oh right, yeah.
Which also gave me like horrible nightmares to the point where I like woke up screaming.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. I watched it with my housemate in a room, and when we came out of the room, I couldn't tell anybody what we'd just seen because I didn't want to say it out loud.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a kind of
a different
kind of fear. It's more like being utterly disturbed.
Yes, exactly.
And I've had great horror experiences watching things like the funny games. That really frightened me, and that was on a more kind of real level as well, where you're thinking, oh my god, someone's just going to come and bash my front door in and come into my house.
The home invasion ones are really terrifying, aren't they? Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many I could go on. All the different wonderful kinds of fears. And then there's the absolute brilliant anxiety of watching things like, more recently, I thought The Invitation.
Oh my god, I love that film.
An hour and a half of brilliant anxiousness.
Oh.
And Train to Busan also. Just, the ones where you're just squirming.
Yeah, that's totally really fun, scary Train to Busan, isn't it? Totally fun. The Invitation is like, I'd lump in the same category as maybe something like Kill List too, where I'm so uncomfortable and I'm scared, but I don't really know why or what's happening or what's gonna happen. It's this. I think that's a genius film, The Invitation.
Yeah, it's so good, so well directed. And but then there's things like The Shining, which I was literally obsessed by for quite a few years. I used to watch it like once a week.
Yeah, me too.
And just the chilling atmosphere of something like The Shining that kind of gets under your skin in a different way, and also squirms into your brain with these slightly surreal images that pop out at you. So it does definitely burrow somewhere into your brain that you're like, oh, I like it here, but it makes me feel weird.
Yeah, it's the same as that backwards talking dwarf. Like, why is that scary? But it is somehow. It is. Yeah, crazy.
It was just something that I couldn't understand, and I remember him being in my nightmares after watching that.
Yeah.
But I like my nightmares. I didn't like the nightmares I had after watching a Serbian film, but generally I do quite
kind of nightmare.
Yeah, I do quite enjoy being a filmmaker. They're quite good material.
Yeah, I know. This is when you know you've made it, when you're giving other people nightmares in your films.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Prano. If people want to find you on social media or that kind of thing, where's best to find you?
I'm on Twitter. It's at Prano Bailey Bond. And I have a website which is www.pranobailybond.com. Very original.
Excellent. If people do want to track down any of your films or anything, I mean, what's the easiest way? Are they kind of out there, or is it easier to sort of catch them at festivals and that kind of thing?
So I did a short called Shortcut, which is on All 4. I did it as a series with Film 4.
Awesome.
So I think it's Fright Bites. If you go on All 4, you can look it up. Most of my other stuff you can watch like clips and trailers on my website. Nasty isn't online yet.
Still on the circuit.
Still on the circuit.
Just won an award.
It did, yeah. It just won an award for the music, which was really nice. It's nice. It's a couple of years old now, so it's nice to still be, getting recognition for it. It's so nice to know that people still like it and it's not out of date. But when you make something that's about the past, I guess
it
doesn't feel as out of date.
Yeah. I'm hoping it'll be the same with this podcast. We're focusing on old films.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's stuff on my website. Actually, I did a music video called. It was for a track called Poltergeist.
Oh, cool.
Which is on my website. It was one of my first music videos, and probably one of my favourites still. And I played all the characters myself,
nice.
Which was painful because I had some crazy prosthetic makeup done. It was a really full on shoot, and one of the characters I was inspired by the creepy guy from Poltergeist 2 with the hat and the suit. So anyway, so you can look at that on my website, seeing as it's connected to the podcast.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my two guests, Bryan Ryan and Prano Bailey Bond. If you want to find social media details for either, they will be listed in the show notes. So let us know what you thought of this week's show. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. What do you think of The Fog and Poltergeist? Do they still hold up all these years later? Please do get in touch or discuss the movies with other listeners in the discussion group. The Evolution of Horror discussion group can be found on Facebook. And don't forget, if you listen to us on iTunes, please do drop a little review on there. It really helps the podcast get boosted and discovered by new listeners, and it's also very nice for me to read. If you do give me a little iTunes review, I will give you a special shout out and a thank you next time. So, speaking of next time, we're going to be back next week to discuss one movie and one movie only. This is a criminally underrated and deeply disturbing ghost movie from the early 80s. The film is called The Entity, and it stars Barbara Hershey. If you haven't seen The Entity or even heard of The Entity, I urge you to seek it out and give it a watch before next week, because next week we've got some really fascinating discussions. So joining me to discuss this movie, well, first of all, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant academic scholar and Freudian cinephile Mary Wild. She is going to give her take on not just The Entity, but on ghost movies in general, what they can often represent from a Freudian point of view. There's some really interesting stuff to learn there. And then, to discuss the movie The Entity in spoilerific detail, I'm going to be joined by two fantastic people who have been on the podcast before, and I'm so excited to have them back. They explore the intersection between feminism and the horror genre. Last time, they were chatting to me about slasher movies like Slumber Party Massacre, and now they're going to be discussing The Entity. I am, of course, talking about Anna and Olivia, aka The Final Girls. They'll be back to discuss the movie with me in depth. So join me next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.